Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Bulletproof Dental Practice Podcast. It's Peter and I again. It's been a long time, Peter. Got a lot of guest hosts, and if I wasn't so secure about myself, I think I'd be I'm being asked to depart.
Yeah, well, you didn't get that certified letter.
Oh no, you know what? I didn't. I've been out of the country, so I shouldn't have spoke too soon. But
Yikes!
I invited my way into this thing. I guess it's only a matter of time.
Well, make it count, considering this is your last. Make today count.
Today will count, actually, because it's an important subject that I'm really excited to dive into. And I wonder, there's a lot of shame in dentistry. And I oftentimes say that. I don't know if I said it in the podcast or not. I'm just an associate. I'm just a GP. I'm just a this. I'm just a that. I don't have my own practice. There's so many qualifying verbiage that comes out of most dentists' mouths, and it's usually coming from a place of shame. And there's a narrative, and we can probably have a separate podcast about where it's coming from, but a narrative that you should own your own practice. And whether it's from your supply house or the people that make all the technology or the people that are trying to sell you the dental chairs, but they want you to run and open your own practice. And I think it's from a business standpoint, big business, big dental business that wants you to go out and buy all that stuff. But in actuality,
so today you're discussing kind of the difference between entrepreneur, and then the pains and the solopreneur. And the solopreneur, and then the stresses on all of them.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. So yes,
I'm just making sure that's what we're.
Yeah. Today is about entrepreneur versus solopreneur versus intrapreneur.
Yep.
And I don't think those are widely understood, and it's just good to identify who you are.
Well, give a quick definition, Craig, in your mind of those three.
Okay, so Peter, you're an entrepreneur, right? Mm-hmm. You're a dentist by trade. You don't practice clinically, but you grow practices, and you have a business mind that allows you to grow businesses that are productive, whether or not you actually work in them directly as a dentist or provider in those practices. That's an entrepreneur.
Yep.
A solopreneur is what most of our listeners is. It's a single operating professional. An architect or a dentist doesn't have any other dentists working with them. But your business would essentially stop if you decided to not practice in it anymore. That's the majority of people, solopreneur. Yep. And then an intrapreneur is an associate, a person who works for a guy like you or maybe me, and they create their own business within the framework of an entrepreneur. And what's great about being an intrapreneur, and what I love about entrepreneurs, is that their income, their salary, their wages is decoupled from their retirement asset and their retirement account. So for guys like you and me,
what do you mean? What do you mean?
Well, you and I have our retirement and our wealth strategy intimately locked with our businesses,
with our equity,
yeah, correct. Our equity in our businesses.
Yeah.
So imagine an intrapreneur, an associate that works in a practice and is doing well, successful, making a couple $100,000 a year, and that practice doesn't do well. That area doesn't do well. Something happens, a hurricane or a flood, or just the demographics change. He or she's going to take his skills or her skills and go find another entrepreneur work in, because they're always going to be protected. They'll always have their skill. And when they invest in themselves, like you and I have to invest in bricks and mortar and build stuff, they only have to invest in their skill. So if they go out and they take COIS or, all these different courses and learn a new skill or a new craft, that stays with them for their entirety of their career. And what I love about the intrapreneur is that their salary and the retirement strategies are decoupled. What does that mean? That means that they're making a couple $100,000 a year, maybe more, and they get to diversify their retirement account. In other words, they're not building a practice, they're not building brick and mortar or chairs. And if something were to go wrong, it doesn't collapse their whole retirement strategy. So they can invest in S&P or maybe cryptocurrency, or have diversified portfolio of real estate. And I love that, because now you have your income and your wealth as two separate silos. And I think from a protection standpoint, you're going to be more protected than the average person, because we've all been fed this narrative that, yes, build a practice and run it well. Oh, and it's going to be worth so much money. Oh yeah, they're paying 50 times multiples now. It's just not true. I mean, Peter, how many people have you talked to that come to you and say, hey, I heard my practice is worth double digit, or X number of millions of dollars. And
I got a letter in the mail saying that they do 300% top line revenue. So that must be what it's worth. Right. No.
Yeah.
I'm saying, not me. I'm saying a hypothetical. I hear this.
Right. And in actuality, when you go to sell as a solopreneur and you go to sell your business, they're really going to pay you with your own money. So the DSO is going to buy you, or the ownership company is going to buy you and pay you out over, maybe the clawback over 3 to 5 years. And it's really going to be like, you might do the math and it might look real sexy. And then at the end of the day, you're like, I should just work here for 7 or 8 years and then throw it away.
Well, that's a good, I want you to pause there. So when we always talk about EBITDA and earnings, so think about it, right? So whatever multiple you get, that's essentially the year. It's equivalent to the year and how long they're paying you back with your own money, right? So if you get an 8X, they're saying, hey, that's a good valuation. We don't mind making our money back until about 8 years from now, essentially, right? And they're planning on growing the practice, right? But if it's a 3X, it's a 3-year, right? So that's a funny way that you just kind of, you said that and a light bulb kind of went off. You're like, yes, that is paying you their own money, and you can actually find out how long they're paying you their money based on how much money they're giving you up front, based on the multiples of an EBITDA if you're in that scenario.
And,
right?
and I don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole.
I know, but I can't help it sometimes.
No, this is a great conversation. But what the point I was trying to make is that the idea that grow your own practice because it'll be very sellable in the future is not something that is predictable or guaranteed. And if look at your career or my career, let's say if you wanted to practice dentistry and love practicing dentistry and love doing what you do, I could argue, and it's a financial calculation, that if you make a certain amount of money and you invest it and you diversify that asset, I think you'd be better off doing that than opening up more dental practices. Because even though the narrative is like, open up these dental practices and it'll be worth a lot of money, chances are you're not going to have the entrepreneurial gifts to do what you think you're going to be able to do. You get to 1 or 2, like, our friend Tim always says, you open up the first one because you're awesome at it. You open up the second one and you're running in between 2 and 2 different locations. And you open up the third and you're like, oh shit, nothing's really making sense here.
Right. So
I just think that narrative that's been sold to us, and that narrative also creates shame, because, I just have one practice, or I'm just an associate, because there's a narrative that says you're supposed to own multiple practices or, be an entrepreneur in dentistry. And I don't think that always fits. And what made me think of this topic was, like, you don't hear medical doctors saying, oh, I'm just an associate at the Cleveland Clinic. I don't own the Cleveland Clinic.
Right.
I just work there.
Right.
Oh, it's freaking awesome. Like, it's an amazing organization, and you do not care that you have no ownership in the Cleveland Clinic. But in dentistry, it's so readily, the medical profession doesn't have that.
But that's a recognized badge of honor, meaning, yet you're right. Dentistry doesn't have that analog in dentistry. There's no Cleveland Clinic style dental thing that people have this status signal, this badge of honor to say, yeah, I'm one of those dentists.
Well, there are those iconic. There are some iconic practices that people are really proud to work at, and they're gonna, maybe there's some level of pride around certain iconic dental offices to work at, and those dentists that work there may have to work harder and make less money.
As you're talking about this, and you're going through the 3 types, and have you gone over the solopreneur? Did you go over all 3 types? Okay.
Yeah, solopreneur is the typical dentist.
So
works for
the
himself.
thing that popped in my head when you're talking about this is risk. And so there's symmetric risk and asymmetric risk, right? And and with symmetric risk, you get symmetric returns, meaning here's my time, here's my money, right? And and honestly, we know of several dentists who their time is very valuable. They're associate dentists, and they're probably making $1 million or close to $1 million a year, right?
Yeah,
it's doable,
we know this,
right? So, and I know lots of practice owners who make nowhere near that. So it's not that, if the end game is, well, I want to do it because I want to make more money, right? Because that's what we're talking about in the risk. But usually asymmetric risk is a scenario where if that resonates with you, and I mean asymmetric meaning minimal downside and unlimited upside. And that usually resonates with entrepreneurs and people who really need to take more risks, because like you said, in the instance where there's a business owner versus the let's say the associate or the dentist who doesn't have equity, you're right. They can carry their skill down the way. If the practice doesn't work and they work in the practice, cool. They're still getting paid regardless, right? They're upping their skills, getting paid regardless, and they can hop and take those skills to the next and next and next. You are totally right. When in the owner scenario, there's a lot of risk going on in terms of taking on debt to then going with this thesis of I'm going to open up these practices or practice. And if you're wrong,
you're screwed.
You're real wrong.
You're real wrong.
You're wrong for a long time, especially if that gets into a situation where you're in a Chapter 7 situation where you're having banks reclaim stuff. And I've known several dentists that's happened to. So you have to be, it's a risk tolerance that you need to know about, right? Symmetric risk versus asymmetric risk. Craig, you opened this pod with me kind of knowing, like, I knew that I was unfit to work for someone, right? I knew early on in my life that I was an entrepreneur. I mean, I didn't know what that word was, but at age 12, I was buying and selling dirt bikes, right? At age 15, I was able to be a waiter for one day. My dad said, go get a job. I got fired in one day. I was horrible.
I sold
But hold on. And so I pivoted and said, all right, well, I'm going to open up my own pressure washing business. Okay. Which I did. In college, I put myself through a lot of I paid off a lot of dental school by buying and selling domains. I've told you this before.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just in my DNA. And when I found out that dentistry, irregardless of what my professor said, that I was capped in earnings and this and that, I was just going to be a general dentist, regardless of what they said. When I finally got out and saw that there was no ceiling, I was like, holy shit, this is an entrepreneur's paradise. If you want, if you don't want, it's still just it's still a great profession. So, and honestly, this has been backed up by the stuff that Dwight has been working with us on, Craig, with the culture index, right? That culture index defined and basically said, like, look, you love this stuff. You love a risk. You love an entrepreneur. You love the visionary stuff. You love this stuff. So it's back to what you always say. You always say this, Craig. Know thyself.
Yeah.
Know thyself. Do not cut and paste people's narratives. And I know I kind of hijacked your thread on the differences, so to speak, of, entrepreneur, solopreneur. I know I've kind of hijacked it into something else right now, but I think it boils down to that again.
Yeah, but there's also, and I agree with everything you said. In addition to that, though, Peter, it's like you and I are hyper invested in dentistry. Peter Maluk has a very famous saying. He said to me once, he's like, the number one reason why people get on the Fortune 100 list is consolidation in one area. And he said the number one reason why they fall off the Fortune 100 list, consolidation in one area.
Yeah.
So, as
you make your money in specification and you keep your money in diversification.
Exactly my point. That sounds like a Nabolism to me, by the way.
No, that was it. Probably, I'm sure, but the specification came from
unpack that. So you make your money in specific knowledge, but you grow your money in diverse assets, portfolios. So you and I have everything works out fantastic and the timing and everything's perfect. It'll be great. It'll be fantastic,
right?
For all of us. But for the associate dentist that's working, for an entrepreneur, for the intrapreneur, the person that's refining their skills, constantly investing, going all the courses, learning a wide variety of skills, that person, as long as they have the financial discipline and they start early, they could dwarf the best dental entrepreneurs.
Total. Well,
in return on investment, low stress, and diversification.
I agree because the business is you are the business, meaning when you're in that scenario, you are the business and you get to focus on that, on the micro, meaning just me, just my skills, just my case presentation, just my speed, just my efficiency, all the things of me. And you get to take that to the next. So you're saying that's investing in yourself is what it is.
Right. And what you'll oftentimes hear is, yes, I would do that, but I don't own a practice. So you know how many times I've heard someone, I'd love to go to the Bulletproof Summit. I don't own my own practice. I'm like, okay. Do you own your own result? Because I have associate dentists that work with me. Some make 220 and some make 790. Same thing. What's the difference? It's their results and the efforts they put in. So there's a narrative that says, I am not going to bother learning right now because I don't own my own practice. And I've seen associates that work for friends that were really kind of bare minimum associates. They weren't really doing very much. They went out, they opened up their own practice, they started investing in their skills, and they started kicking butt. But imagine if they just would have done it while they were an entrepreneur.
Right.
So it's just, there's a very interesting thing. And I hope I hope we're making ourselves clear about this idea that I won't do it because I don't own it, but just do it because you do own your result. And
and you can own your result, and you can also brand yourself in today's day and age for 100%. Free, right? Like we talk about this at Summit, the Instagram and the tick, all the branding stuff you can do. Like Jenny Perna does a ton of that. She's an associate or was an associate, and she built her own brand, right?
Yeah. And there's a guy that shares space with one of our masterminders, nameless, but he's a very influential dentist. He lectures about direct bonding procedures. He gets tons of patients from Instagram, and he shares space out of one of our mastermind doctors.
Yeah.
Doesn't own anything.
Right.
So, I mean, it's really cool, that idea. And I just think that the idea of an associateship has, or I should clarify it. Like the idea of a career-long associateship has a degree of shame to it. And I really don't think it should. And if I had the opportunity to go work in an amazing practice that looked the part and functioned the part, I would have signed up in a second. I only did what I did because there was nothing like it around.
Okay. Well, but let's go back to something, because we talked about equity, and I'm not going to get into equity of dentistry, right? But you cannot make your way to riches by just aggregating dollars and putting them into account, especially in today's day and age.
Well, you can't trade time for money.
Where does the super associate that you're talking about, I guess you've defined the solopreneur and the entrepreneur usually have equity. So where does that associate dentist, where would you advise them to go create wealth? Beyond,
so easy. The best place ever.
Where?
Real estate. The best place ever. The best place ever. You and I have access to a lot of very wealthy friends and know wealthy people. And the one commonality amongst many of them is real estate. Okay. So, the pain of an associate dentist, or even the pain of any well-producing craftsperson like a dentist, is that our income comes as ordinary income. We get taxed to high hell. The ultra rich actually don't. They have assets. They don't make money. They have assets, so they don't pay the same level of taxation. So the true hedge and the true way for a dentist to turn their income into true wealth is just real estate. It's living below your means.
And that's a sweeping generalization, and it's dangerous because a lot of people got real hurt, Greg, in 2008. If you had taken this advice and heard this podcast in 2007 and went all in, you would have gotten really hurt. Right? Meaning 10 years of your quote unquote associate money could have been wiped out in 3 or 4 months if you had been playing long in the real estate market. Now, granted, it would have recovered by now, right? If you zoom out.
Yeah. Had you not panicked and sold.
But sometimes a lot of people didn't have the choice whether to not panic and sold because they were being foreclosed on. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't want to make it seem so easy. It takes, especially if you hate real estate, if you hate managing properties, if you hate looking at that stuff, if then again, know thyself and know that that's probably not where you're going to make. It's not going to be fun.
Well, you asked a specific question about
I did. You're right.
Risk and reward. The way to do that is commercial real estate, but it's also a higher stakes game. Mm-hmm. But investing in the S&P.
Why is it higher stakes?
Well, because it's leveraged, and you can get yourself in trouble, and if you get some vacancies and stuff like that. It's also specific knowledge required to enter the real estate market, and you need capital. But I mean, investing in any tangible asset, even the S&P.
Yeah.
Had you taken 20% of if we had taken our careers and taken 20 to 30% of what we had earned and just dumped it in the S&P 500, just a stock portfolio,
right?
We'd have a significant amount
of Here's why I like, when you're talking about the S&P, you have to own all those funds to go deploy, meaning you have to, with real estate, you can have leverage. And so leverage can either wipe you out or create a lot more wealth for you, right?
Yeah, well, you won't get a capital call if it's not leveraged.
Well, right. So if you're in the S&P, it's all your dollars that you deployed, right? With the real estate situation, it's typically you put in one and the bank puts in the remaining 4. Yep. If we're talking about getting to $5. And so there's leverage created, which can work out. So if you buy it right and you're going to hold it a long time, then yes, that is a good way to wealth. And so you and I are of the same mindset because we like You talked about it, the tax advantages, blah, 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 but we like it. So we've learned about it and we study it and we get on LoopNet and we look at properties and blah, 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 all the things. So I don't know why I'm going down this trail of wealth, but because it's really not applicable so much to what you're talking about. But I think it is.
It was like part of the fundamental idea of that.
Mm-hmm.
A well-disciplined entrepreneur can kick ass.
Mm-hmm.
Can kick ass. And let's talk like, listen, it's not just money, but emotion and time. Like when you're an entrepreneur and it's 5:15 and you just hung up the handpiece, you've written your last note, you should leave. Outside of your dentistry, you shouldn't think about a thing. And I can speak for myself, and I'm sure I can speak for you too. The dentistry towards the end of your clinical career, I'm sure, was the easiest thing you had to do. After 15 years of doing dentistry, it's pretty freaking easy. You don't lose sleep over dentistry. You lose sleep over regulation and what you're going to do and the advertising and how you do it. I mean, it's another thing. So maybe you'd be trading off a couple dollars, not owning if you're that entrepreneurial dentist, but what you pick up in emotion and time could be huge for you. And I just see so many people being pressured by the narrative to go into a position that doesn't naturally suit what they want. They don't know themselves and they go in because everybody's, on the soapbox of saying, own 3 and 5 practices and dentist is CEO and blah, blah, blah. So I think that's just an important distinction for people to hear.
I like how you're bringing this up, honestly, because it's, I would say disproportionately our listeners are more in the entrepreneur mindset, right? I mean, that was kind of the thesis of the pod in the beginning was that I think it gravitated more. So I like that we're talking to a different class because to your point, Craig, you can still apply the same methodology, but you become the business, you become the brand, you become you're investing in yourself versus investing in the business.
Of course. Same social media tactics we talk about, same exact stuff, but just to grow your own portion of the business.
And look, when you have that, right, when you have that built up and you can redeploy that, you become more valuable, meaning from a negotiation standpoint, right?
100%.
Right. Versus like, I just want to get a job, right? Well, okay. Well, the job is going to pay just what the job pays. But if you come in and say, hey, I've got, 15,000 followers. I know these skills. I'm going to add this value to the business. I'm going to bring blah, 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 blah.
I get 3 requests per week to have.
Yeah. Everyone's going to follow me. I'm going to rise this whole business. That's a different conversation in terms of compensation.
Of course.
Right. And so that is the one thing to think about. And if you can modify that over time, you're right, Craig. Maybe you become the one that wins. Maybe you become almost like, we bellyache about specialists demanding more or specialists demanding this. Maybe you are kind of a quasi specialist at that point, meaning you branded and you have a skill set that probably only less than 1% of dentists on the planet have.
Yep.
And so you essentially did specialize just postgraduately. You did, and from a market standpoint, you are a specialist. You've specialized, just not in the context of.
No, yeah, you're a specialist, not
you are a specialist.
endo-perio sense.
I like this.
Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? And there's before this ever happens, there's like, well, I can't do that because I don't own my own practice. In other words, they believe that the outcome of their future is predicated on the entrepreneur or the ownership structure of the practice. Mm-hmm. You'll find a practice that can support your skill. So, if you're going to take on all these courses and you're going to, learn more techniques and FMR and, rebuilding vertical and stuff like that, and you want to practice in like some shitty ass practice, it's not going to it doesn't fit your skills.
Right.
It's hard to sell $40,000 and $50,000, $60,000 cases when you're like literally like in the crappiest location, the crappiest practice. But, you and I have the unique purview of seeing the same building and seeing massively different results between different providers.
Yeah.
And it just makes me go like, that's interesting. Why is it that doctor, 1 can do $2 million of production and doctor 2 can't even get $100,000 or, $500,000 of production? Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. And also something to compound is that the sale of that practice may not be all it's cracked up to be unless you're a true entrepreneur and you're producing EBITDA, revenue, without you being there. That's the key. If you're not producing revenue without being there, you're just kind of fooling yourself. You really are. You don't have a business. And even though the offers will come in, the mailers will come in, when you really distill down the numbers and you really, really look at it, they're going to pay you with their own money, with your own money, rather. That you're going to be paid with your own money.
Yeah, it's not charity. Meaning, no one's there to say, "Hey, you did such a good job with your career. We really respect the hustle you did for 20 years. Here's a lot more money than you're worth." They're going to give you, right? They're business people. They're paying you. They're going to make money in the long term off you, right? And that's just the way business works. I don't blame them.
It's like a paycheck.
Otherwise, it'd be charity.
It's a paycheck advance.
It's a 3 to 8 year paycheck advance.
Right. And if you're going to want to work more than 3 to 8 years, you might as well work for the 8th, 9th, and 10th year and then literally throw it away. If you take the taxation and all that into it as well. Because you got to remember, with long-term capital gains tax going up now as well, you get that money, which is whatever, 3 to 8 years. Then you pay tax on it. It's really 2 to 6 years. And you wanted to work 7 anyway. So the 7th year and the taxation, you might as well just chuck it and throw it away. So I think know thyself goes into know thyself as a business as well. And I think that dentistry and dentists just don't understand that. They're proud that they're owners. They're proud that they're solopreneurs. But in actuality, it's really not that sexy. You got to wait till everything's done. If you get sick, if something happens to you and your plan is that you wanted to sell your practice at 65, but you're 53 and you get sick, your practice is worth 0.
All right. So like, I want to just bear with me as I unpack this.
Or maybe not 0, but
let's take the solopreneur and then we'll end it on this. So you just said doing dentistry sometimes becomes the easiest part of dentistry, right?
Yes.
All right. So let's take the solopreneur
of your career. Yeah.
Of your career. I agree. Right. So let's take the solopreneur versus the associate. Okay. So I would say the solopreneur is probably spending half the time doing dentistry physically, and then half the time probably running the business. And maybe that's off. Maybe it's 70, 30, 60, 40, whatever.
Right.
Okay. The associate is converting 100% of the time. And we just talked about how you can superpower that 100% of the time. So in an apples to apple, what if that solopreneur took that 40% that they're quote unquote just running the business in a mediocre standpoint,
right?
Easy for me to say, right? And took that hourly that they're being and put it into it. So
I like where you're going with it. Keep going, Peter. This is exactly, you're helping me. Like this is exactly what I'm trying to say.
And
so
sometimes it's the belly. We hate the most, the 40% we hate the most. And if we just take that 40% of time that we kind of gobbled up doing payroll and HR and compliance and OSHA and all the systems and all the stuff we hated, and said, hey, I convert $20,000 cases all day long. And you could have done that with that 40% of your time in a different vehicle. And now you're happier, you're wealthier, you're healthier, you have less worry.
It's also like figuring out what your hourly rate is worth.
Right. There.
So like if
as a solopreneur, meaning the business net. Yes.
Right. And as a solopreneur, it'll be easy to conflate. This is quite easy to run the business because it's just you. You know, the trickiest person to manage is usually the most highly compensated. That's you in a solopreneur.
Yeah.
So like you're the racehorse, you're the hard one to manage. If you have, if you're an entrepreneur and you have, 150 team and you have 20 docs, I'm telling you, the doctors are going to be the hardest thing to manage, most likely, or the highest paid the highest paid people are going to be the hardest thing to manage. And you'll say, oh, it's so easy. Just calling in payroll is so easy. It's because you have a team of 5. You don't understand it. And then you think about, what are you being paid for that? Imagine if you took that same amount of time, you're an entrepreneur now, you're an associate, and that 40% of your week, that 10 hours a week, you just started taking real estate classes or met with an advisor or hired, there's real estate firms out there that will actually manage properties for you.
Right.
Your return won't be as sexy, but your downside would be a lot more highly mitigated.
You're in a REIT. And most dentists at that point are accredited investors. There's a lot of deals open to accredited investors, right? And I won't go into what defines that, but you are right. There's access to deals that can give you decent, solid returns, 8-9% returns in perpetuity.
Right. And I'm just saying, if you took that amount of time that you managed the business and you really compared it to managing another business or investing or managing your investments, I just don't know who would win. I think in a solopreneur situation, I think the entrepreneur will win. Entrepreneur will win all day long, typically, because there's high risk, high reward. but I'm just talking about solopreneur, single owner versus entrepreneur, associate dentist. That's discipline.
Yeah. And that's the only metric you're looking at in this scenario, right? Who's winning. But if we talk about the burden of stress, the burden of doing shit you don't like makes life miserable, which makes you think that I hate being, miserable being a dentist, right? We have this discontent in our profession. Why is it? It's probably not because you're doing a bunch of awesome life-changing dentistry. It's probably because you're doing the shit that you don't want to do. Like I said, the HR, the OSHA, all the stuff that you're like, my God. And I got to do this.
It compounds because, you're trying to see 2 columns of patients, a column or 2 of hygiene. And then Sally, the hygienist, wants to talk to you because she, is really upset and you have to comfort him or her or whatever's going on. So it's a workload. It's compounding of workload. I found when my clinical schedule slowed down or I slowed it down, I had more time to be a good leader. So I was booking so hard with clinical dentistry, so much, 4 days a week, running, 10 different docs, 40 team members, and doing 4 days of dentistry. I was not a great leader. I was short with people. It was not good. It wasn't good for my team. So you have to actually figure out what you want to be.
You had no bandwidth. You had no bandwidth. Yeah.
I had none.
I like it. I like it. Let's wrap on that. I think that's good. Unless you got anything else to add, I think we drove it home.
No, I appreciate you helping with that because I think it's an important subject to discuss. And for those,
this is an important topic for you, meaning you really want this message to be delivered because you've brought this up several times. I think this is important to you and you probably have more conversations. Let me try and people know that you're the more. You have the empathy and you want to talk about things of the 2 of us, right? So I think you get hit up a lot more on like, hey, my life and my happiness and these kind of things. And I think you have more context for conversations of people saying, really not happy or
it's like the first step of true suffering is a narrative that makes you suffer. We have a guy in our mastermind. He's like, yeah, I got this building and the payment, and I had that like breakthrough with him on one of our Tuesday calls. He's like, I'm like, look, he says, I'm only making this amount of money. I'm like, that's not true. You have to take the amount of money you're making because you decided to be an entrepreneur and he owns his building and blah, blah, blah. And then take that amount of money and take the amount of business growth that you did in that year. So if your business went up in value by 200 grand or 300 grand, I want to add that to your salary too. And then I want you to take the amount of principal you paid down, the 70, the 90 grand of principal, because he had like a $4.5 million building. And I want you to add that because you're bullshitting yourself if you tell me you're only making
take a recent valuation of that building.
Right? Exactly. And then add the capital.
Add that back on.
Right.
So, and then look at the tax savings of doing a cost, all the things.
Right. But that's the truth, Peter. That's not just an exercise of mental masturbation. That's the God's honest truth. So if you are that,
that's a net worth statement versus a what did I make statement.
Right. And the entrepreneur should not be really overly concerned with their salary. Scott Galloway, when he was on our podcast, he said very clearly, I've never made more than $150,000 in salary in any given year. The guy's probably worth like 80 million or something, double-digit millions, but he never made more than X dollars in a year.
I literally, and this is no bullshit, I literally just updated because I track net worth every month because I think, back to Pearson's law, and I have all the things listed, all the debts, so it's assets minus liabilities and tracking all the things. Okay. And so I updated, I log into my bank accounts, I look at what I owe on buildings and I put it in. And so to your point, Craig, sometimes I'm like, man, I don't feel like I'm growing here. And then you look at the abatement of what you're doing over time of the net of the abatement of the principal that you just forget about sometimes on buildings or the loans on your practice. And so you're building the net. Yeah.
You wake up overnight, or what seems like overnight, but it's really 10 or 15 years. Like, oh shit, I paid down that much money in real estate. I did that. I have that much less. So for those that chose to be the entrepreneur, don't give me that. What are you making? If you're going to wind up being an entrepreneur, you can't think as a salaried worker any longer. You've decided to, invest, and investments are, need to be accounted for, not just the amount of money coming in the door.
I love it.
But like everything else though, you get to a certain point, you're like, shit, I'm not satisfied anymore. I remember thinking, I've told you
well,
this
it's
before.
a growth thing. And that's what we preach, right? If you're just in homeostasis and you're stagnant and like, okay, everything's good. Like that's kind of a boring
agreed.
way to live. And I think idle minds, bad shit creeps in.
Yeah.
So
that conversation, by the way, where I tell people like, look at your principal reduction and your business valuation before you tell me what you make, that is like an instant game changer for the psychology and well-being of the person that hears that. There was a guy that one of my associates had me call, this guy named Arvind, and he was really upset and blah, 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 blah. And I had the same conversation. I was like, what'd you pay down in principal? Exactly. And what did you do this? What did you do that? What did blah, blah, blah. And he wrote it all down. And what he thought he was making like 150 grand a year. And he's pissed off because as an associate he was making 250. He was really, if you look at the balance sheet and his net worth, he made like 400 grand that year. And then instantly felt great about himself. So funny, and same thing with our masterminder. He's like, that was instant. My girlfriend was so happy. And it's just so funny how we tend to F ourselves up with the dialogue. And that's the reason for this podcast. And that's the reason why I'm always harping on it, because it's not true. So if you're to close, if you're that entrepreneur and you're happy and you don't have that entrepreneurial zest and that desire to do it, just invest. And take the same amount of time that your colleague, the entrepreneur, is taking on managing the practice, and manage your assets and your wealth, and you will kick ass. And you will also decouple your salary and your retirement strategy, which is really, really financially secure.
I agree with you. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We'll get you next time.
See ya.